On this episode with Davidson Hang, we'll be looking at some ways to maximize your network, from networking to using your LinkedIn and how that can provide opportunities for your career and your business. And we'll also be talking about some of the troubles that you can experience as a child and how to overcome them with some practical tools in gratitude and being present at the moment. Hey, listeners, what's up? This is Josh Tan. I'm one of the hosts at the CXO Circle. And today we have our awesome guest, Davidson Hang, also a co-host for the CXO Circle. So this is a Meet Your Host special. Davidson Hang is a senior transformation consultant at CoachHub. He is also a prolific podcaster and YouTuber and LinkedIn guru. He is a life coach, career and transition coach. He is also the author of Redefining Masculinity, The Great Pause, and The Great Pause Journal. And in his spare time, he likes to volunteer for different organizations. He sits on the board of multiple nonprofits, including the Society of Asians in Sales and Customer Service. And he is like a brother from another mother to me, great friend, committed colleague. And honestly, it's just a pleasure to share this journey with you, Davidson. So welcome.
Thank you, Josh. I'm excited for your vision and what this creates. I see a lot of potential, and you're always adding value, and you're always being such an awesome resource and a super connector for a lot of people. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Davidson. So Davidson, can you just give us a picture of who you are in the world and what's your expertise and your claim to fame?
I like that claim to fame. I've never thought of it in that way. And when you first asked me that question, it had me thinking, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely the networking king. That's what everyone says. I'm the type of person that, when I walk around New York City, so I always run into someone I know, and my wife's like, dude, can we just get groceries in peace? Like, do you have to always run into someone you know? So I would say that, and how to leverage LinkedIn in a way that you can get. I've helped over 130 people get jobs at like Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, and all these amazing companies. And I figured out a formula that works.
Wow, that's really exciting. I'd love to hear about that formula and some networking tips from the networking king that you could teach the audience. So part of this podcast is sharing our expertise with the world and making the world a better place and helping aspiring leaders, business owners, and influencers. So what could you say in networking that would make a difference for people?
This sounds like really corny, but the first step that I always tell people is writing handwritten cards, like handwritten notes, makes a big difference. Like, I have written probably in my lifetime over 1,000 handwritten notes. So birthday cards, Christmas cards, any excuse, like happy anniversary, like whatever it is, right? And it's helped me a lot, like so much that like if I need to fundraise like $10,000 for a charity, I can easily do that just because I've cultivated so many awesome relationships with a lot of good people.
I do love a handwritten note. How do you keep track of everyone's dates and occasions?
I have a spreadsheet that lists like everything. Where I met them, something unique I remember about our conversation, like, oh, they're going to Turks and oh, they went to the Bahamas, like this. Okay, I'm gonna like I'll remember something very specific and exactly where I met them as well. And people tend to be surprised at how much energy and how much I remember about meeting them. Like, I'd be like, oh yeah, like, this at, you did this at this, and then it'd be like 10 years later, like, you remember that? It's like, yeah, of course, I just pay a lot of attention, or I really focus on that stuff.
That's really a hack to networking. What kind of mindset do you have when you're meeting people and you're networking with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think this might be a curse and a blessing. Like, I'm always like, yeah, you never know where we'll meet. We'll meet one day, right? And sometimes it does work out. I mean, a lot of times, like, I'll never see that person ever again. But I always treat like each person. Like, my uncle gave me really good advice. He was like, this is so bad to even say this out loud in a podcast, but he was just like, Yeah, like even treat like the ugly girl nice because like she might grow up one day to be like really hot. And what I mean, what I took it from a networking standpoint where it's like, well, this person might not be of someone that I might do business with or might, be my partner, my coworker one day, but you never know. Like they might be my buyer, my procurement person, my marketing team. Like you never know. And so far, that's led me to live a pretty fruitful life.
Okay, so you're remembering interesting facts about people. You're getting to know them, and you're just kind of leaving the door open. Would that be right?
Yeah, and then I think to take a step further, I always host like events to get, and I always connect people together. Like if I'm meeting someone new, I'm like, oh, Carly, oh, knows this. Oh, yeah, I'll introduce them to. So for me, like, because I always ask like everyone I meet, like who are you looking to meet, like who, and then because I always ask that, I always know, oh, okay, this person is looking for a co-author for this book, or oh, this person is looking for finance. They're looking for investors in their company. Oh, this person is looking for a board of directors. So I'm always connecting people, and because I'm always connecting people, people would love that, and they always think of me, and they're like, "Oh, I hung out with Catherine the other day, and we were just talking about you because you're the one that connected us. Now we're like best friends." So it's always nice. So I'm indirectly like I don't have to do any selling because everyone else is essentially selling me for them because like they're like, oh yeah, like we got connected to Davidson, right? So even though they did business 8 years later, they'll remember that like it was at Davidson's happy hour that they met.
Oh, okay, got it, got it. So you're like the center. You're like the center of attention without being the center of
Yeah,
attention.
yeah. It's like subconsciously, like I guess I'm doing it through like, well, I don't need to sell anyone in this group because everyone here is here because of me. So they're gonna be, oh, like so how do you know Davidson? And then that's how they talk because that's the only commonality that they have, like that they know me usually, right, at these events. So naturally they're gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, we met through like the Tony Robbins conference, or we met at EZU, or we met at EDC Vegas, or whatever.
So if somebody were to start becoming a networking king or queen, what would you say a piece of advice for them?
I would say block off time like every week to do like all the networking activities. I mean, for me, it's not draining. Like I know some people, it's like they're exhausted. They're like, dude, I had like 5 coffee chats last week and I'm like dead. For me, it gives me energy. So I would say take this with a grain of salt, but I would say definitely like dedicate people. Those are the most successful at networking and getting ahead. I feel like they're like intentional about networking where it's like they set a goal where it's like, okay, like for me, it's like, all right, every week I'm going to speak to someone in a different country just because like my company's like super international. So I'll talk to someone from Turkey. I'll talk to someone from Hungary, like someone from Ukraine, like all these. So that's like my goal where I'm like, all right, well this week, like I want to have like a much deeper conversation and become more intimate with someone, that we're talking not just about work stuff. So yeah, so I would say block off at least an hour. Most people do it on Friday. Fridays, like, people tend to be more laid back and I would say, have coffee or have a drink with someone like at least once a week. And then if you're up for it, host like a happy hour at least once a month. And that's where you can just get everyone together. So that way, you don't have to necessarily like do like a lot of work. They're essentially doing a lot of the marketing for you.
Okay, awesome. And with that, do you just invite anyone or do you kind of pre-select who you're inviting?
Yeah, I tend to invite like other super connectors as well. Like if I'm like, oh wow, this person like super connected, he knows everyone. Like I tend to invite people that I think know a lot of people.
Okay, thanks for that. I wanted to ask also about LinkedIn. You said that you had a LinkedIn formula. What is that about?
Yeah, so this is the formula that I've told like 150 people separate occasions. So one, when you reach out to someone, it depends on, are you asking like using LinkedIn to get business or using LinkedIn to get an introduction to a company that you want to do business with? That's the ask.
Whichever one you want to share with the audience.
Okay. So I'll just give you a story of an example. There was this bank that wanted to meet with the COO of the company. So I saw that he was connected to this guy that I went hiking with, right? So I ghost wrote like Steve, and gave him a call, right? And I was like, hey, like, how do you know Mike? And he said, oh, we were at the racket club together. I'm like, oh, great. Like, would you do me a big favor? And then I'll go write the email, and then I'll like spell it out. I'd say copy and paste this in an email, put me on the CC, like super spell it out so like people don't have to think at all. Because sometimes like anytime there's like any friction, like people aren't going to do it. So you want to reduce friction as much as possible. And then, and then in that I'll introduce myself, and if you see him at Racket Club, like put in a good word for me, right? So that's how I was able to get in with a lot of banks, a lot of management consulting firms, like a lot of companies. And then another trick that has worked for me is like, first you find like any commonality. It could be that you went to Rutgers together, and Rutgers has a huge alumni network, right? So what I did that was really fruitful was I would host like alumni like networking event, but these were people that I wanted to get to know, like future clients, like prospects and channel partners. And I just kept doing that, and then eventually, like you don't have to sell, because like they're gonna be like, oh, so like what do you do, right? And then that's where they're like already interested in what you have to say. But the formula for getting introduction is find any commonality. So being Asian, Josh and I are both Asian. I would reach out to any Asian CFOs or Asian COOs. And then I would lead with that. And the funny thing is, it always works. Like, I'm like, hey, why'd you take a meeting with me? Like, you're a partner. I'm sure you don't get a lot of requests. They're like, honestly, it's like, because you're Asian. I'm trying to help a brother out.
All right. Play the Asian card. I like it.
Yeah.
So looking for things that are common with people, leading with that, and then asking for what you want, or is there any more steps in between?
Yes. Make it super clear, like what you want. Right. So the formula, I would say, is like find like there's some sort of like compliment or acknowledgement that you're acknowledged, especially if you don't know someone. Like it's like, wow, I see that you volunteer for like the Orphans Future Alliance. Like that's really amazing. Like that, would love to. And then you always want to be curious about like, hey, how did you get to like where you're at, right? And then when people are sharing about themselves, and then at the end of that, they feel like really connected to you. They're like, yeah, so like, how can I help you? And then that's when you can make that ask. But it only happens after like you showed some sort of interest in that other person. And most people, I think young people have this block of they're like, oh, that person's older. Like they're not going to have time for me. But what I realized is like older people really like the energy of like, the younger person. They love to mentor people because that's what gives fulfillment. That's what gives them purpose. So that's what I have found to be like very helpful.
That's a really good one. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Going after older people that want to mentor younger people. Smart.
Yeah, it works.
Okay. So what would you say, like, you've achieved the level of success so far. Would you say that you're happy with your levels of success, that, you're where you thought you would be at your age?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I never thought I would be like where I am now. Like, because I grew up pretty poor, living off of food stamps. My mom does nails. My dad was a bartender for Benihana. Now he's an Uber driver. So honestly, like I didn't have a lot of confidence growing up. So I definitely think I've far exceeded my expectation. Like I never thought I would be an author, let alone publishing 2 books this year. Never thought I would have a podcast, be a YouTuber, like any of this stuff. So yeah, I would say I'm like overall pretty happy with how life has turned out for me.
That's awesome, David, and congratulations on all your successes. And I know you're going to grow up, right? I know you're going to grow to be like this real big influence in the world, really big positive influence. Would you say that, networking and LinkedIn have been some of your secret weapons to get there?
Yeah, it's almost like this secret that is like, it's like when you have like your favorite restaurant, you really want everyone to try that like restaurant, right? Like LinkedIn and Landmark, I would say like my two secret, like where I'm like, oh my God, like giggling, like I wish everyone would know about this, you know? So with LinkedIn, like I definitely have made it known where like I do a lot of workshops for high schools, middle schools, colleges, MBA students, like around like maximizing LinkedIn. There was a volunteer group at LinkedIn where we did that, where we would meet with like immigrants or people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds that we giving back to the community. Like I would do a lot of those webinars, and I took it for granted, but I'm like, wow, like this really has made a huge difference for someone like me who didn't grow up without like a father or without a lot of mentors and resources.
Can you tell us, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit more about, what was it like growing up without a father, coming from these hardships and these trials?
Yeah. I mean, it was tough, like I was always comparing myself to my friends. I was like, oh man, like I wish I would stay at my friends' shore houses, or I would stay at a lot of my friends had like fathers that like took them out and like taught them things. Like the only thing I can remember about my father was like, and maybe this is maybe the person who I am, but I remember we would play basketball and I was like a 3-year-old kid, and I would try to shoot the ball and he would just smack the crap out of the ball like Matumbo style. That was just like my relationship. Like we played Monopoly and he would like steal from the bank, and I was like 8 and he'd be like, it's a shame, man. Like I was stealing that $500 from the bank every turn. You didn't even notice, like, man. And that's what he taught me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How did you not let that affect, or like how did that not, or maybe it did and we don't know that it affected you negatively, and then you had to like undo that pattern.
Yeah. Well,
so how did you? What were some of the effects of having that kind of influence?
Well, it's funny you mentioned LinkedIn and networking, right? Because if you could think of LinkedIn as a person, LinkedIn would be someone who like has a lot of friends, right? So ironically, I think because I wanted to make friends so badly, because I really wanted to feel that like sense of love and belonging and connection, I think that's what led me to like create all these events like happy hours and get-togethers with other Asian orgs at Google and Amazon and et cetera when I was at LinkedIn, because I was like, whoa, like this is cool, like because I've always wanted to feel like I fit in. So I guess naturally I was like, oh, if I could be that person for a lot of people feel included, like people feel like they belong for a lot of people, like that'd be great.
Okay, all right. So in a way, all that missing in your life led you to like fill that void with networking and people and businesses and clients, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, and it's also led me to realize that like, oh, if I didn't have that, I guess, chip on the shoulder growing up, I wouldn't be so ambitious. Like I wouldn't feel compelled to like want to win more awards and Employee of the Month awards and President's Clubs and stuff like that.
I have that a lot of people in the world, they might be suffering from what we call like the father wound, right? Missing father, or like emotionally absent father, maybe even like parental abuse. What would be the biggest piece of advice you can give someone that's been through something similar?
Yeah, I would say try not to be intentional and conscious of who we want to be versus only focus on who we don't want to be. Right. I think for most of my life, I was focusing, well, I don't want to be like my father. I didn't want to be, and if that's my focus, like that's in a very disempowering context versus now the self-talk and the language is more like, well, how can I make someone smile today? Or how can I make someone laugh today? Or whatever it is, right? Like for me, that's more genuine, that's more authentic than it's like, well, how can I like not mess up and not be a failure? That's not really an empowering self-talk.
Oh, okay. So I hear you're focusing on the positive qualities you want, the positive person you want to be, rather than avoiding the negative things you want, the negative person you want to be.
Yeah.
So I know, Davidson, you've done a lot of work on yourself, a lot of personal development, personal transformation. And I'd love to hear how taking on personal development and even spiritual development have helped you become the person you are and helped you achieve the success you have today.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've read over 100 biographies, mostly billionaires, business tycoons like Bill Gates, Paul Allen, a lot of wealthy people, right? Phil Knight. And I realized like I'm always into pattern recognition. Like, okay, well, let me see what's the pattern with all these like billionaires. So to answer your question, I noticed there's a lot of like even at Tony Robbins, he always gives a story of this billionaire where he asked like, hey, like, do you feel like you're successful? Like as a joke, because like he's clearly successful. He's a freaking billionaire. And the billionaire replied back, like, no, I feel like I will only see myself as successful if I show up to my kids like volleyball practice and their baseball games and their cross country practice. And until this happens, like, then I'll finally feel successful. And then he always says like people look around, they're like, is this guy like crazy? Like, is he being humble? Like, is this sort of false humility? Like, what's going on here? But everyone saw like it was like true that he felt like he was not successful. So that's a long way of answering your question. But I do think the more awareness I have around like what actually makes me happy, and it's not like, because I like every time I've won an award, like I won this competition at LinkedIn, or I won the Cultural and Values Award at LinkedIn and stuff like that, right? Like I feel good for about like 10 minutes, and then I'm left feeling empty, right? And I'm like, huh, what was that about? And I was like, oh, because like actually what will have me be happy is X, Y, and Z, not this thing, right? This stuff is like externally, like, oh, I think this would make me happy. Like, oh, maybe if I travel to more like vacation spots, I'll be happy, right? But in actuality, it's like the depth of the relationships that I have with people, like where we can talk about like really raw stuff. Like, I have some friends that, like yesterday I was crying with these two other girls from the landmark program that we had together. And I was just like, man, like that's like what really makes me happy versus like getting that promotion and stuff like that. And everyone's different, right? That for you, it could be like getting that promotion, but a lot of times it's not that.
So what I'm hearing you say is taking on self-awareness has helped you find what really makes you happy.
Yeah, I think not only that, but it helps us reframe ourselves into being more effective as well. Like, I realized the reason why sometimes it takes me 5 times as much work to get something done is because I'm like avoiding being straight with people. Like, hey, are we gonna work together or not? Right. And then because I had that realization this week, I'm like way more effective this week. So, stuff like that, right? It's like that awareness makes a huge difference.
And how did you go about cultivating that?
The being uncomfortable thing?
That's self-awareness. How did you go about like developing your personal development habits and when you started taking that on, how did you start developing that?
I definitely noticed I'm like, who do I attract? Am I attracted to at these companies that like have this aura about them, right? And I'd be asking them like, oh, and they'd be like mentioning Landmark or Accomplishment Coaching or Tony Robbins, and I'm like, huh, okay. So then naturally, like, and then they'll also recommend it to me too, and then that's how I was just naturally attracted to people that have like good energy. So being around those people, I'm like, hey, what's your secret sauce? And they're like, oh, actually, I just took the Communication Access to Power course, or oh, I just took Landmark's like team management leadership program. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
So you were influenced by the outside to take a bunch of programs you didn't know existed.
Yeah, because I'm like, yo, like Michael Pearson. Give you an example. I'm like, who's this guy like showing up so powerfully, like doing all this cool stuff, meeting with the Pope, like, you know what I mean, transforming business education. I'm like, dude, I want what that guy wants. And then he's like, yeah, I mean, I'm doing this thing called the Team Management Leadership Program. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
Okay, I got what you're saying. So you were noticing where people people were inspiring you, and you wanted to like learn how they got their sense of like power, freedom, self-expression, influence, impact. Okay. How did you know that you always wanted to make a difference in the world?
I mean, I think I always did, but I wasn't present to it. And then I think like the moments where like I'll have like a high schooler write like, thank you for helping me with my college essay. And then when I get it, that card, that handwritten card and the note, I'm like, I cry sometimes because I'm like, man, like I could die tomorrow and I would feel like I'm a good person, you know? So for me, it was just being present to like, what are my happiest moments? I'm like, when I hosted that, like the event with like 150 Asian people and we were talking about breaking through the bamboo ceiling, I was like, that was dope, man. Like I created that. So for me, it's just being present to all that.
I will say I'd like to open up that, doing business and creating your own business and running a company and climbing a corporate ladder. You can definitely lose sight of what makes you happy. I know I've been there. So thank you, Davidson, for sharing that for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for someone who's in a situation like that, who might be losing sight of happiness, joy, what lights them up? How can they find it again? Like an easy way to find it again without reading 100 autobiographies.
Yeah. What's this? It's called ayahuasca. No. No, I mean, I would say I guess the other alternative to that was like, I always say like, I mean, this sounds corny, right? But I think like just a gratitude exercise like really helps a lot. Like if I'm feeling like really like, man, like today is not my day, I will just sit down and I'll just like, meditation helps because I'm like, oh, I'm breathing, I'm alive. And then after I get past the fact that I'm alive, I'm like, I'll think about what I'm happy, excited, proud of, grateful. What am I, who loves me? Who do I love? And which ways have I given today? And then from those 8 questions, like I'm really grounded in like the reality versus like the stuff and the triggers that are thrown my way.
I love that. The human mind has like a negativity bias, right? So we look at all things negative. Basically, we give them a 4x level of importance in our brain. So taking time to pause and be grateful and notice what you have instead of what you don't have, really powerful. Definitely recommend it to everyone listening. Awesome, Davidson. So Davidson, we're coming to the end here. I just wanted to get, your final closing words to inspire the audience and get them on a path of discovery, growth, transformation. What would you say in this intersection of, business, personal, and spiritual development?
Yeah. I would say like as human beings, we hate being stagnant. Like we always want to grow, right? Whether it's like being better at CrossFit, doing like an ultra marathon or whatever it is that you have your eyes set on and you've been procrastinating. I would say like be uncomfortable at least like once a week, like what's that thing that I could do to be uncomfortable? Is it reaching out to that like CTO or is it that chief revenue officer at Asana that I've been wanting to pick his brain and do a podcast about, but I'm like afraid, just do one thing that makes you uncomfortable. And then I would say do one thing like for yourself every day You know, is it like, for me, it's like, ooh, I'm going to eat this amazing ice cream, you know, like burnt raw milk ice cream from Morgenstern's, or, you know, burnt sage ice cream. I was like, oh, yes, like it's for me, and just treasure that moment.
Awesome. So right after this podcast, you're going to grab some ice cream. Oh.
Yes, I give you permission to eat ice cream.
Ice cream, taking time to be grateful, doing something for yourself, and being uncomfortable. I love that. That's awesome. Davidson, always a pleasure, brother. Thank you for your contribution in the world. I just want to acknowledge you for making a difference. I know you stand for a lot in the world, right? Redefining Masculinity, your book, definitely check that out, as well as mentoring so many people, mentoring so many Asians, so many young men, and even young women, and, you know, helping people transform to achieve something that wasn't possible before they started their own journey. So thank you for all your support and causing in the world.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your consistency, your vision, your ability to come from the left and the right brain eloquently. And yeah, I'm excited to see what what is possible through this. And yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome, Davidson. Thank you so much.